Good day, everybody. My name is Dr. Leon Perlman. I'm in New York. I'm the head of the DFS Observatory, housed at CITI at Columbia Business School. And I want to welcome everybody. We've got a wide range of people from all over the world today. And we're going to talk about trends and challenges in mobile money and mobile banking application security. We've got one of the world's top experts, Professor Kevin Butler, to present. It's a very important but sometimes underreported issue, and we're very lucky to have Kevin here today. So here's the agenda, a quick overview of the observatory, then we begin the live webinar. It's about 45 minutes. Then right afterwards we're going to do two quick polls which I encourage you to participate in. Then we're going to have a live 15-minute Q&A after the presentation. Please send only text questions to the moderator host. Please don't use audio. And then straight after the Q&A is an optional live quiz. It's a 10-question multiple choice quiz. The quiz link should be in your email now. It won't be live until the webinar ends. And it's only live for 2 hours for certificate purposes. And we'll get into the certificate in a moment. So just remember, check your email box now, and especially check your spam folder to see if the quiz link is there. So a little quickly about the DFS Observatory. We were formed in last year with a grant from the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation. These are some of the observatory's activities. We encourage you to look at our unique legal and regulatory database on DFS issues. We're producing model laws and regulations. We're having our annual Emerging Payments and DFS Summit on Thursday and Friday in New York, and we just about sold out. Very popular. We do the webinars, which you're a participant in, around tables, a number of publications, commentaries and analysis of new laws and regulations, and we have a lot of collaboration with industry regulators and standard setting bodies around the world. So these are some of the webinars. If you want to participate in others, go to the registration page and sign up for the series. We have a number of them, very interesting webinars coming up. And for those who are interested, you can earn a certificate of attendance. It's very simple. What you need to do is attend 6 webinars and get 60% for each post-webinar live quiz. So you have to do the quiz within the 2 hours immediately after the webinar ends and get 60% for that. So if you want to pass, you have to concentrate on the content of today's webinar. If you're taking the quiz, there's a lot of material, so I really encourage you to look at the slides and take notes, and you should get through the quiz quite well. So I'm going to hand over soon to Professor Butler, again, one of the world's top experts in the field. He's an associate professor of computer and information science and engineering in Florida. So he comes to us from always sunny Florida, where he's the lead researcher in system security at the Florida Institute of Cybersecurity. And I've had the pleasure of working with Kevin over the number of years in various projects. And I can attest that it's going to be a very, very interesting presentation. So over to Professor Butler.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Okay, great, there we are. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be able to talk with all of you this morning. And thanks for being early if you're here in Florida. Thanks for making it late if you're in Asia. Today I'm going to be talking about trends and challenges in mobile money and mobile banking application security. And so I wanted to start by talking about just the genesis of mobile money and electronic cash. This has been a goal for many years. People have been talking about mobile money since the 1990s. What we really saw is that in many ways it was the developing world that's really pushed efforts in the area of electronic cash and mobile money forward, particularly with the M-Pesa experiment in Kenya, where people realized that airtime could be used as essentially a commodity that could be traded just like cash, and essentially ended up doing so, and then so created a new economy for mobile money. Since that time, mobile money has really exploded in popularity all across the world, as we see by the figure in this in this map here. There are deployments of mobile money in many countries around the world. It's particularly popular in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia. There are also deployments through South America, and they've been increasing in the Western world as well. So this has been a very interesting phenomenon. Now, PISA itself brought banking services to the unbanked rural and the urban poor. There were 270 deployments of mobile money systems, and that number is increasing as is the end where these systems are being deployed. Some countries have seen as much as 30% of their gross domestic product spent through mobile money systems. Now, increasingly, as the original M-Pesa system started on what were so-called feature phones. These are the candy bar Nokia-style phones where you have the ability to text messages and essentially use SMS as a means of communicating, and that's how the money was being transferred. Increasingly, what we've seen is that with the rise of smartphones everywhere in the world, mobile money application deployments are happening on smartphones as well. And the question that we asked in our security research group was, are these applications secure? So let me start by make sure I can. Okay, great. Let me start by talking about the ecosystem that digital financial services, including mobile money, essentially are created within. This is a helpful chart to understand all of the various components of the ecosystem. There are many elements and stakeholders within the DFS ecosystem. Security is important both within these elements and in the links between these elements themselves. So you can really think of within mobile money in particular, the primary customer is going to interface with the DFS and mobile money ecosystem is through their mobile phone. So they take their phone on their phone. The operating system is what these apps actually run on, and in devices that have SIM cards, those SIM cards can contain information as well. Those phones are going to interface with the cellular system through a mobile RF network. And what just happened there? Okay, great. So through an RF link, through the cellular network, the phone and the base station are going to communicate, and that's how information gets from the phone to the rest of the mobile network. From the base station, information can be radio links to a network operation system, and then from there into the network operator system, over the internet from there to the operator of the digital financial services system, both their software and hardware systems. So for this presentation, I'm primarily going to focus on the DFS app that's found on the mobile phone, though we'll see that that has implications on the rest of the network as well. So let me talk about some of the ways in which, when we're looking at this ecosystem, we can better evaluate the security of the system. These so-called security dimensions represent 8 different ways of evaluating criteria. So the first one here is access control. Access control means the protection against the unauthorized use of network resources. Second, authentication, which is the way by which we confirm the parties that are using the system. Non-repudiation means ways of ensuring that a particular individual or entity was the one that actually performed the operations in question. While confidentiality is about protecting data from unauthorized disclosure and essentially ensuring that nobody else is privy to that information. There are a few more. The most important ones are data integrity, which is ensuring the protection of the correctness and accuracy of data, as well as availability, preventing denial of access of information, and privacy, the protection of information that might be derived by actually seeing network activities occurring. Now, when you're evaluating a DFS ecosystem, and evaluating any system really, but particularly mobile money systems, the following things are important with regards to evaluation. The goals that we have are adherence to those security dimensions I just talked about, ensuring that the system is robust with regards to malicious adversaries. And so in other words, making sure that the system can't be compromised by malicious attackers. Ensuring that there's so-called end-to-end security supported by all elements of the ecosystem. By end-to-end, I mean that from the start of a communication to the end of the communication, that entire communication, all the information that's inside that communique should be protected, and that should be supported by every ecosystem element. And there should also be resilience in case any part of the ecosystem is compromised or otherwise fails. Okay. So with regards to what we saw in systems like M-Pesa and other first-generation digital finance systems, is that the mobile phone is going to connect to the base station over well-known mechanisms such as the GSM, and then GSM itself is going to have is going to cipher that ensures you can between the device and the base station. However, in these systems, once information is sent to the mobile base station, from that point onwards, anywhere else in the system up until the mobile money server, which can be somewhere else within the cellular network or within even another network altogether, all of that subsequent information is going to be sent unencrypted. The only encryption is between the device and the base station. That means that if there's an adversary at any point along the way between the base station and the remote server, they're going to be able to access customer information and be able to potentially modify that data. There's also another problem in the encryption algorithm is weak. So that initial link between the mobile device and the base station can also be compromised because there are well-known ways of essentially extracting the key and other confidential information to be able to eavesdrop on those conversations. There's also ways by which the actual infrastructure of the cellular network can be modified or can be used in order to eavesdrop on and perform location tracking on calls. And I believe that Dr. Perlman is going to be talking about that during a later webinar. Now, what smartphones actually provide is a new mechanism by which the entire transaction from the mobile device out to the server can be protected. We have the ability to have so-called end-to-end security because these smartphone devices are capable of performing encryption directly on the device and can then ensure that encrypted packets are sent across the network so that nowhere between the device and the mobile money server can an adversary interject themselves and be able to eavesdrop on or otherwise modify information. So this is a great new capability, and we wanted to see how this actually works in practice with regards to mobile money deployments that we see in the wild. So feature phones and 2G cellular networks have the problems I just talked about, the ability to eavesdrop on them, weak cryptography. And the move to modern data networks and smartphones offers many opportunities for improvement. So the question that our research group at the University of Florida asked was, are these security practices of DFS applications, especially as they're being deployed on smartphones, any better in this new setting? Now, in order to answer this question, we first examined the ecosystem of applications that were being deployed in the digital financial services environment, and so what we have is some of the marketing that's been seen in some of these applications. For example, buying digital contents without risks. In one case, a particular deployment claims that security is being confirmed with so-called the double lock. In another case, so-called anti-hacking codes are being used by an application to ensure that data is kept secure. Now, double lock security and anti-hacking codes, unfortunately, are not really terms that are well known in the security community, and they're not something that one can quantify for evaluation. What we have here is a substantial amount of marketing jargon without any real detailed evaluation of the underlying security of these applications. So this was our starting point for understanding what was going on. And as we closely at these apps, we realized we started this work 2 years ago. We looked at the time at all of the available smartphone-based money applications that the DSM Association had identified. And we looked at all of these apps with regards to the client-side security, in other words, the security that's being practiced on the mobile devices themselves. On the server side, which is these mobile devices are going to connect to these remote servers, and the servers themselves are important to look at to ensure that they're handling data correctly and securely, and as well as the policy environment that these applications operate within. And we took a deep dive into 7 of these applications. We started by performing analysis in the DFS. There are tools in the market that can be used for automatically understanding the security of smartphone applications, especially the way in which they perform communication. And so we did this analysis over apps. All of the white stars represent countries where our app deployment actually occurred. And what our findings were was that across these 46 apps, almost half of them had vulnerabilities in the way that they perform their communication. So there were essentially issues with the secure communication, perhaps choosing methods of encrypting or other such issues. Now, one of the issues we have in the current environment is that automated tools, as we realized, are themselves potentially susceptible to so-called false positives and false negatives in the results. Now, what do those actually mean? A false positive means that something is flagged. In this case, the application is flagged for being insecure, when in reality it's because the application, the assessment tool, was looking at a condition that would never actually be exercised in practice. By contrast, a false negative means that a tool doesn't signal that there's an issue and one actually exists. And we found, unfortunately, the state of the art with automated assessment is that both false and also automated analysis is limited at this time. Currently, the best solution to the actual accuracy of results is to do manual analysis. In other words, taking an application, recovering the source code and analyzing that that code to see what's actually happening within the app itself. Now, to do this, it's a time-consuming operation, but it yields strong results. So we looked at 7 applications in the mobile money space, so representing over 1 million users. And we focused our inquiry on the registration and login routine, the user authentication after a user logs into these mobile money programs, and the portion of the application that deals with actual transfer of money. And we looked at applications, both relatively large deployments and somewhat smaller deployments, in order to get a cross-section of the state of security. And we also looked at apps from a variety of countries to get some geographical diversity as well. Now, at a high level, our findings can be summarized as follows. 6 of the 7 apps that we looked at had critical vulnerabilities in their security. We found it was trivial to steal users and to steal their payment histories and to fabricate or modify transactions. In other words, it would be possible to steal money out of these users' accounts. We found a total of 28 different vulnerabilities, representing a broad diversity of security issues. The types of issues that we saw related to the way that communication was being done, the protocol that's being used for secure communication called TLS, and I'm going to talk about what that means in more detail. The way in which cryptography was being used improperly, the ways in which information was actually being controlled, and the way in which it was being protected on the app and on the smartphone itself. All of these were issues in a substantial number of the applications that we looked at. So like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about what transport layer security is, so that you have some background as we talk about these particular issues. So when you use a web browser as an example, you'll often find that when you're going to a protected site such as your bank's website, other data where secure information is being transferred, you can tell whether the communication is securely by looking for a lock icon in your web browser, and you'll notice on this slide that I've circled here that lock. Now, what that lock means is that a transport layer security is a protocol. It sometimes might be how you've heard of it before. It's a protocol that it's a which data can be protected as it travels from the mobile, in the case of from the mobile device, to the DFS provider. So this is a general purpose security mechanism that's being used in the internet to essentially ensure the confidentiality and the integrity of data on that network. Now, this is an important feature to have because it ensures the security of information as it's being communicated across. It doesn't necessarily mean that data is going to be encrypted as it's being stored on the other side or stored on the device, but it protects the data as it's in transit between the mobile device and the server. So we understand how these mobile money applications were making use of the TLS protocol. And there are 2 sides that we can test this on. The client side, we can test what are the so-called TLS certificates. Essentially, there are 2 keys that are being used in a TLS transaction. Public key, and one is a key. And everybody can have access to the public key, but only the entity in question can have access to the private key. So a TLS entity can create a certificate, which is a publicly disclosed piece of information that can be validated cryptographically for its trustworthiness. So on the client side, we wanted to make sure that clients were properly validating those certificates, because that's the means by which you can assess you're talking to the right entity. That's the ensures that the entire transaction. The servers, we wanted to determine what settings are actually being supported on the server. And now there are a number of ways in which you can set up a TLS connection, and there are many different cryptographic ciphers that can be used. Unfortunately, some of those ciphers have been shown to be insecure. Some of them have been broken by researchers and by others. So old and insecure ciphers that allow you to communicate with the server represent a vulnerability. We also wanted to make sure that the servers in question are up to date and protected against known attacks against web servers. Now, there's a system out there called Qualis. Qualis is actually a company. They run they have a tool in SSL server test, and means by which you can test the security of the web server in question. And that's the way that we use to assess the security of the servers in question. So let me talk about what we found on the client side. So the Android operating system correctly validates certificates by default. In other words, if you write an application in the Android, which is what the vast majority of mobile money application systems use, in fact, what the vast majority of people use around the world as a smartphone operating system. If you were to write an application and list defaults that were found within the Android operating system, you would be able to correctly validate certificates. We found that 4 of the 7 apps that we looked at overrode those default certificate verification routines. Now, why would that be actually happening? Our suspicion is that this is because developers likely turned off the warnings from when they were developing apps, perhaps because something wasn't happening the way that the operating system anticipated it should, and as a way of silencing the warning, you as a developer could just put a workaround so that those routines aren't actually being used in the first place. Now, on the server side, as I said, we use a system called Qualis, the server test, and it gives you a letter grade. The highest grade you can receive, the lowest grade you can receive an F, and the system works using a secure communication protocol like TLS. Now, our findings based on the applications that we examined were that some of the applications did reasonably well. Some of these applications received an F, and some didn't get a score in the first place. The ones that didn't get a score, in some cases, weren't using any type of communication security at all. And the ones with failing grades were using systems that were or ciphers that are known to be weak. In other words, if you were to connect to these servers and you were able to negotiate a weak algorithm, and the security of the case is then potentially compromised. Now, let me say a little bit about some of the. This isn't a lecture on cryptography, and I'm not anticipating that everyone's going to be an expert in that area. So I'm going to briefly talk about why some of the issues that we saw are particularly problematic. In one case, what we found is that now the entire way that the security of a system works is often based on the underlying cryptography, and you can think of a cryptographic algorithm as having a key, and that key is what's going to be used to encrypt information. So the security of that key and the inability to guess that key is very important. In the case of one key that's being used to encrypt the user's first number and also used to authenticate with the service, could be easily created. It's done, every single key used that's generated by this particular application has the same starting point. As you see on the screen, there's a string of characters, and every single key starts with that same string of characters. This would be equivalent to having a password that you log into, and everybody logging into a system having the same first 3 or 4 letters of that password. So really decreases the security. It means you have to search for a lot less information. Furthermore, the rest of the key is comprised of the phone number of the registered person who's using the application and their account number. And this information can either be easily guessable or retrieved by person if you know who they are, or because of the relatively weak communication security being used in this application, previous method would reveal that information. And at this point, an attacker has enough information to be able to put all of this together in order to create the key themselves. They already know the first part because everybody knows that part. They can retrieve the phone number and the account number, put those together, and now they have an encryption key. And they can now essentially log in they can now decrypt the user's personal information number, authenticate the service as their own, and essentially have control over the user's account at this point. Now, in another deployment that we looked at, we saw a number of perhaps even more problematic issue. In this case, what we're showing here is the process that happens when a user registers for a mobile money account in the system. The first thing that's going to happen is that the user is going to send their data, their important data that's going to prove that they're who they are and give them the registration. It's going to be sent along with a key to a social server from the mobile. Now, this information is going to be sent unencrypted between the device and the encryption server. In return, the encryption server is going to send back an encrypted version of the user data with the key that was used to encrypt this connection, this information attached without encryption itself to the device. And then that, in turn, that information is going to be sent to a so-called registration server. Now, the application is only cryptography that's being used. So anybody who is able to eavesdrop on that link between the device and the encryption server is then going to be able to have all of the information they need, because they don't need to do any type of decryption on their own, because that link is unencrypted. They can just pull that information and they can take the key and they can use that then to register themselves as that particular user and the security of this scheme. So the question is, who's going to take the liability if there are failures in the system? So what we found was that in many cases, these systems are not properly safeguarding user data confidentiality and integrity of transactions. But when we looked closely at the terms and services of each of these applications, we found in every case, the user is responsible for all authenticated transactions. In other words, because the user has the PIN, it's assumed that any transaction that involves using a user PIN, it was going to have been done with the express consent of the user. So they're ultimately going to be liable for any issues that occur. And this is the case whether a user uses their PIN or intentionally gives their PIN to somebody else, or potentially in this case having an attacker steal the PIN because of some of the weaknesses in the mobile money application deployment itself. In other words, when these systems are attacked, according to the terms and services of these applications, the user themselves will pay the price. Now, we presented this work at a major academic security conference a couple of years ago, and we sent the vendors private reports giving details about the vulnerabilities and precise instructions on how to fix those vulnerabilities that we found. The story was picked up by international media, and we've collectively been involved with vendors in order to sound the issue about security in these applications and to provide recommendations for doing it better. So we felt as though progress was being made. We wanted to evaluate whether that was actually the case. We wanted to see what based on the work that was happening in terms of raising the alarm about security was that better security decisions were being made. So last year, we went back to the GSM Association's tracker of mobile money application deployments, specifically on smartphones. There are now 271 companies, 49 of which have Android-based applications. We then performed an automated analysis on all 49 of those smartphone apps, and then did a manual analysis on the apps that we had looked at the year before. Doing manual analysis is very time-consuming, but gives us the most accurate results. From an automated analysis standpoint, we look to see whether the secure communication protocols being used were actually going to provide security for these applications, or whether they were performing operations that might unsecure these secure protocols that would allow, for example, turning off authentication. Back in 2015, when we did this for the first time around, we found that 20 of the 43 apps that we looked at had a vulnerability. The following year, 3 apps had fixed issues, but the others remained vulnerable. An interesting research community has shown that across the app stores at large, across the hundreds of thousands of apps that comprise the app stores, for smartphone applications, about 80% of apps have issues with the way that they do secure communication, especially through the transport security protocol. Now, that's a reasonable number. That number should be smaller, but it's 8%. Is certainly smaller than 40%, what we saw in the mobile money space. And in 2016, we now see that there's still a very substantial number of applications. Far more than 8% of mobile money deployments have these issues with communication security. And this is particularly troubling because these apps are designed to be transferring money, and one wants to ensure the security of these apps in particular. Now, we revisited our analysis of the servers as well, and what we found was that, as we've talked about previously, the security of the application can be at risk if the servers themselves are not configured in a proper fashion. So we used the Qualis test again to see what was happening on the servers that were connecting to these applications, and we found that 44% of mobile money apps were speaking to domains, were speaking essentially to servers that were configured in a way that was insecure or that didn't support any secure protocols in the first place. And with these servers could potentially put your data at risk. Now, we also revisited the applications that we previously found that all of these applications were being actively developed. So these were not being abandoned. In many cases, substantial changes had happened to the applications, to their user interfaces, to some other parts of their business logic. 90% of the apps had in some way or another. However, the majority of applications had all of the same security vulnerabilities that we had alerted these application deployments about in these private reports. In many cases, this is getting enthusiastic feedback from the vendors saying that they appreciated our finding to implement them. And some of the most problematic found in our previous analysis were still there in the applications that we examined. So this leads to the question, why are these apps still insecure? Now, there's no doubt that there's certain elements of security that can be expensive. For example, doing fraud detection can involve a lot of computation and some technically sophisticated machine learning algorithms. We're not trying to force those types of applications or those types of security elements on these apps. We're talking about baseline where known fixes are possible. Also, as I've talked about, we looked at 7 apps in our manual analysis. and 6 of them had issues app that we looked at, really well designed, and none of the had issues that the other ones did. That's not to say that might not have other security problems, but at least at a low level, things like proper configuration of communication security and proper handling of data on the apps happening. So the problems that we've seen in these mobile money application deployments have known fixes. Things like being able to configure your server and patching them to ensure that they're up to date and secure against well-known security vulnerabilities is an important and, in fact, critical thing that should be happening. Similarly, the way in which cryptography is used in these apps should be clarified. Now, again, these are solutions that have that can happen technically, but they're not being done by themselves. This allows us to realize that technological solutions alone aren't going to be the answer for ensuring the security of this ecosystem. Now, to revisit the question that we started with, we said that feature phones and the GSM-based 2G cellular networks have significant security problems. This is true. We wanted to see, are the security practices of smartphone-based applications any better in this new setting? And all we have to come up with is no. It's not better, and in fact might be somewhat worse. Now, why do I say it's somewhat worse? Because the issues that we see are that in order to attack a legacy system, you need some specialized equipment. That equipment's been coming down in price, but it still represents a few $100s to a few $1,000s worth of investment. By contrast, attacking smartphone-based applications only requires a laptop. So the barrier of entry for attacking becomes much smaller, and in many cases, attacks can happen from a much larger set of places compared to attacks against the traditional cell phone environment, feature phone environment. Now, what about regulations? Many countries have modified their financial regulations to make it easier for mobile money systems to operate by relaxing your customer anti-money laundering requirements. In particular, the Reserve Bank of India a couple of years ago put out an illustrative framework for data and communication security. This is a 12-page document that a couple of the deployments that we looked at adhered to by the letter of these relatively vague guidelines. The problem is that you can fall within the letter of these guidelines, but because there's not enough information to ensure the security of a deployment, your application itself can still be insecure. So a number of organizations have been looking at how to better ensure security standards. So the Code of Conduct, the GSM Association has created a so-called Code of Conduct and has other initiatives that were designed for the industry to regulate through security best practices. Organizations such as the International Organization and the International Telecommunications have also been developing standards and recommendations for mobile security aimed at the financial industry, telecom regulators, central banks, etc. So I've been involved in some of the work on the ITU side with recommendations for security, and let me leave you with a couple of those recommendations based on our investigation. What we found is that what we recommended is that the developers of digital financial services apps should make use of hardware and software mechanisms inside mobile devices, sometimes secure hardware and secure software lines to ensure that data is protected inside applications that are running on them. And application developers should be making use of these mechanisms. Developers should ensure that applications are designed and implemented with regards to best practices from industry and standard setting bodies, including encrypted and authenticated communication and secure coding practices. DFS providers should ensure that these apps are subjected to external security review. In other words, have outside groups look at these apps and vet them and try to attack them so that any issues can be determined in-house before they go out to customers and are potentially subject to attacks that can compromise and developers themselves ensure that the apps are securing information that's critical to customers, such as their username, passwords, other personal information, and should use strong authentication mechanisms to protect against unauthorized access. To summarize, our takeaways from the state of application security is that while mobile money is revolutionizing finance, its deployment is problematic. Poor security combined with liability models that hold the users responsible for losses can place the entire mobile money experiment in jeopardy. And so best practices are being suggested by these organizations. The state of the art has a ways to go, but we have the means to make sure that these deployments are safer, and by using secure coding practices and external reviews, we can make the security of these applications much better and make for a safer and better computing experience and for all of these customers. We've published in this area, and feel free to get in contact with Dr. Proman if you want to, or me directly if you're interested in hearing more about what we have to say from the security standpoint. And with that, I thank you for listening to this webinar, and I'm happy to take questions.